The morning sun barely touched the horizon when Major Sarah Rodriguez walked across the tarmac at Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. Her flight suit was crisp, her helmet tucked under her arm, and her jaw set with determination. The other pilots called her Phoenix because she had a reputation for rising from impossible situations. Today, that reputation would be tested like never before. The briefing room buzzed with tension. 12 Navy SEALs sat around a metal table, their faces grim. At the head of the table stood Commander Jake Mitchell, a 20-year veteran whose scarred hands told stories of countless missions behind enemy lines. His team had been pinned down for 6 hours in a valley so narrow that traditional air support couldn't reach them. "The Taliban has our boys trapped in the Kunar Valley," Commander Mitchell explained, pointing to a detailed map spread across the table. "It's a box canyon, maybe 50 meters wide at the bottom. The walls rise straight up for 300 meters on both sides. Our guys are taking heavy fire from positions carved into the rock face." Sarah studied the map carefully. The valley looked like a crack in the earth, a geological nightmare that seemed designed to trap soldiers. Red X marks showed enemy positions scattered along both canyon walls. Blue dots indicated where the pinned-down American soldiers were hiding behind whatever cover they could find. "We've tried everything," continued the commander. "Mortars can't reach that deep into the canyon. Artillery would risk hitting our own men. The angle is all wrong for conventional airstrikes. The valley runs east to west, and the canyon walls block any approach from the north or south." Captain Jim "Bulldog" Stevens, the senior SEAL weapons specialist, leaned forward. His weathered face showed years of combat experience. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we need someone who understands what we're up against. This isn't a regular close air support mission. The enemy has the high ground, perfect cover, and clear fields of fire. Our boys are sitting ducks down there." Sarah nodded, her green eyes never leaving the map. She traced the valley with her finger, calculating angles and distances. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, nicknamed the Warthog, was built for close air support. Its titanium bathtub cockpit could withstand tremendous punishment, and its GAU-8 Avenger cannon could chew through enemy positions. But this mission would push both aircraft and pilot beyond their normal limits. "What's the minimum altitude for effective fire in that terrain?" Sarah asked. Commander Mitchell exchanged glances with his team. "That's the problem, Major. To hit those positions accurately without endangering our people, you'd need to fly at treetop level, maybe 50 feet above the canyon floor. The walls are so close together that your wingtips would have maybe 20 feet of clearance on each side." The room fell silent. Every person present understood what that meant. Flying an A-10 through a narrow canyon at 50 feet altitude was beyond dangerous. It was borderline suicidal. The slightest mistake, the smallest gust of wind, or any mechanical problem would send the aircraft crashing into solid rock. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, no relation to Sarah despite the shared name, spoke up. "Ma'am, I've been in this business for 15 years. I've seen pilots try crazy things. But what we're talking about here goes against everything in the flight manual. The A-10 isn't designed for canyon running." Sarah understood their concerns. The A-10 was an amazing aircraft, but it was built for different kinds of missions. Its twin engines mounted high on the rear fuselage gave it excellent survivability, but they also made it less maneuverable than fighters designed for low-level flying. The aircraft was stable and reliable, perfect for destroying tanks on open battlefields. Flying it through a narrow canyon was like trying to thread a needle with a sledgehammer. "Tell me about the enemy positions," Sarah said, refusing to be discouraged. Sergeant First Class Mike Hammer Thompson pulled out a tablet showing reconnaissance photos. "Intelligence says they've got at least 30 fighters scattered along both walls. Some are in natural caves, others have dug fighting positions into the rock. They've got AK-47s, RPGs, and at least 2 heavy machine guns that we know of." The photos showed a deadly maze of enemy positions. The Taliban fighters had chosen their location perfectly. They could fire down into the canyon while remaining hidden from most angles of attack. Any rescue attempt would have to deal with a crossfire from multiple directions. "Our extraction helicopter took hits trying to get in there yesterday," Commander Mitchell continued. "The pilot managed to get out, but barely. The whole valley is a shooting gallery. That's why we need the Warthog's cannon. Nothing else can deliver the precise firepower we need to clear those positions." Sarah studied the mission parameters one more time. The trapped soldiers were running low on ammunition and medical supplies. Casualties were mounting, and weather reports showed a storm system moving in. If they waited much longer, the mission would become impossible. "What about approach routes?" she asked. Captain Stevens pointed to the map. "There's only one way and that makes any sense. You'd have to come in from the east, drop down below the ridge line, and fly straight through the canyon. The problem is, once you're committed to that approach, there's no turning back. The valley is too narrow to turn around, and you can't climb out fast enough if things go wrong." The tactical situation was clear but grim. The enemy controlled the high ground with perfect fields of fire. The trapped soldiers were running out of options, and conventional rescue methods had failed. Only a precision airstrike could clear the enemy positions, but delivering that strike would require flying an A-10 through a corridor that seemed impossible to navigate. "Major Rodriguez," Commander Mitchell said, his voice serious, "I want you to understand what we're asking. This mission has a very low probability of success. If something goes wrong in that canyon, there won't be any rescue. The terrain makes it impossible." Sarah appreciated his honesty. Military leaders had a responsibility to be clear about risks, especially when lives were on the line. She had flown combat missions throughout her career, but nothing quite like this. The physics alone were intimidating. Flying at high speed through a narrow canyon left zero margin for error. "How many men are trapped down there?" she asked. 8, replied the commander. Alpha Team went in to gather intelligence on Taliban supply routes. They stumbled into a much larger enemy force than expected. Now they're pinned down with limited ammunition and no way out. 8 American soldiers were counting on them. 8 men who had volunteered for dangerous duty in service of their country. 8 warriors who deserved every effort to bring them home safely. Sarah thought about their families, their hopes and dreams, their right to return home after completing their mission. "What's the weather like in the target area?" she asked. Chief Meteorologist Captain Lisa Park consulted her tablet. "Winds are currently light and variable, but that storm front is moving in faster than originally predicted. We've got maybe 4 hours of good flying weather before conditions deteriorate significantly." Time was running out. Every hour of delay increased the danger for the trapped soldiers and reduced the chances of a successful rescue. The enemy would use the time to reinforce their positions and bring in additional weapons. The approaching storm would make flying even more dangerous. Sarah walked to the window and looked out at her A-10. The aircraft sat on the tarmac like a sleeping predator, its nose painted with shark teeth that had become her personal trademark. She had flown that particular aircraft through dozens of missions. She knew every vibration of its engines, every quirk of its controls, every limit of its performance envelope. The A-10 had been designed by engineers who understood that close air support missions required a special kind of aircraft. Its titanium armor could withstand direct hits from small arms fire. Its redundant flight systems meant that it could continue flying even with significant battle damage. Most importantly, its GAU-8 cannon could deliver devastating firepower with surgical precision. But flying through a canyon 50 feet wide, that pushed the aircraft far beyond its intended mission profile. The designers had envisioned the operating over open terrain, not threading through mountain passages barely wider than its wingspan. "Major," Commander Mitchell said quietly, "nobody would blame you for saying this mission is impossible. What we're asking goes beyond normal combat flying." Sarah turned back to face the room. Every eye was on her, waiting for her decision. These were experienced warriors who had seen the worst that modern combat could offer. Their skepticism wasn't based on prejudice or doubt about her abilities. It came from cold, hard assessment of an extremely dangerous tactical situation. "I need to see the canyon for myself," she said finally. "Can we get overhead reconnaissance video from yesterday's mission?" Technical Sergeant Maria Gonzalez pulled up drone footage on the main screen. The video showed the canyon from above, revealing just how narrow and treacherous the passage really was. The walls rose almost vertically, creating shadows that would make it difficult to spot enemy positions. Scattered rocks and debris on the canyon floor showed where previous explosions had left their mark. "The drone was flying at 500 feet when this was taken," Sergeant Gonzalez explained. "You can see how the canyon twists about halfway through. That bend creates a blind spot where enemy fighters could be hiding." The footage was sobering. What looked challenging on a map appeared nearly impossible in real video. The canyon seemed to swallow the small reconnaissance drone, emphasizing just how confined the space really was. An A-10 would fill most of that space, leaving minimal room for maneuvering. "What about the surface conditions in the canyon?" Sarah asked. "Rocky and uneven," replied Captain Stevens. "Lots of loose stones and some larger boulders. The altitude is about 6,000 feet above sea level, so your aircraft performance will be reduced compared to sea-level operations." Higher altitude meant thinner air, which affected both engine performance and aerodynamic efficiency. The A-10's twin turbofan engines would produce less power, and the aircraft's wings would generate less lift. Those factors would make the already difficult flying even more challenging. Sarah studied the reconnaissance photos one more time. Each image showed the tactical situation from a different angle, building a three-dimensional picture of the challenges ahead. The enemy positions were well concealed and mutually supporting. Clearing them would require multiple passes through the canyon, each one exposing her to additional risk. "I'll need detailed intelligence on wind patterns in the canyon," she said. "Mountains create their own weather, and I need to know what kind of turbulence to expect." Captain Park nodded. "We have some data from previous drone flights, but it's limited. Mountain valleys can create unpredictable wind shears and downdrafts. The tall walls tend to channel and accelerate air currents in unexpected ways." Wind shear was every pilot's nightmare. Sudden changes in wind speed or direction could upset an aircraft's flight path without warning. In a narrow canyon with no room for error, even a small wind gust could prove catastrophic. The mission briefing continued for another hour as the team worked through every detail they could think of. Escape routes, emergency procedures, communication protocols, backup plans, every aspect of the operation received careful attention. But everyone in the room knew that once Sarah entered that canyon, she would be largely on her own. "Major Rodriguez," Commander Mitchell said as the briefing concluded, "I want you to know that everyone here respects whatever decision you make. This mission pushes the boundaries of what's possible." Sarah nodded her appreciation for his support. Military aviation was built on calculated risks and pushing boundaries, but it was also built on honest assessment of those risks. She had never been asked to attempt anything quite like this canyon run. As the SEALs filed out of the briefing room, Captain Stevens lingered behind. His expression was serious but respectful. "Major, I've seen a lot of pilots in my career, good ones and not so good ones. I can tell you're thinking about trying this mission, and I respect that. But I've also seen what happens when aircraft try to operate in terrain they weren't designed for. Sometimes courage isn't enough." Sarah met his gaze directly. "Captain Stevens, I appreciate your concern, but those 8 soldiers down there deserve our best effort. If there's a way to get them out, we need to try." "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "Just remember that a dead pilot can't help anybody. Those boys need precise fire support, not a heroic gesture." His words carried the weight of experience. Sarah knew he wasn't questioning her courage or competence. He was simply reminding her that successful military operations required both bravery and sound judgment. The line between heroism and recklessness could be very thin. After the meeting, Sarah walked back out to the flight line. Her crew chief, Technical Sergeant Danny Walsh, was performing the pre-flight inspection on her A-10. Danny had been working on A-10s for 12 years, and his expertise had saved her life more than once. "How's she looking, Danny?" Sarah asked. "Perfect condition, Major. Both engines are running smooth, all systems check out green, but I heard rumors about your mission today." His expression showed concern. "Ma'am, if even half of what I'm hearing is true, you're looking at some serious flying." Sarah trusted Danny's judgment completely. He knew the A-10's capabilities better than almost anyone, and his concerns weren't based on fear but on technical expertise. "What do you think about flying through a narrow canyon at low altitude?" she asked. Danny was quiet for a moment, considering the question carefully. "Major, the A-10 is a tough bird. She's survived hits that would down other aircraft, but she's also big and not particularly agile. Threading her through tight spaces," he shook his head. "That's not what she was built for." "But could it be done?" "Maybe," Danny admitted reluctantly. "With perfect conditions, perfect flying, and a lot of luck, but there's no margin for error, none at all." Sarah appreciated his honest assessment. Technical expertise was just as important as flying skills in a mission like this. The aircraft had to be capable of performing beyond its normal parameters, and the pilot had to understand exactly what those parameters were. Make sure she's loaded with a full ammunition load for the cannon, Sarah instructed. And double-check all the flight control systems. Yes, ma'am, Major. Danny's voice carried a note of personal concern. You've brought this bird home from some tough situations. Trust your instincts out there. As Sarah walked back to the operations building, her mind was already working through the tactical challenges ahead. Flying through that canyon would require split-second timing, perfect aircraft control, and absolute situational awareness. One moment of hesitation or confusion could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The weight of responsibility was enormous. 8 soldiers were counting on her to provide the fire support they needed to escape. Their families were counting on her to help bring their loved ones home safely. The mission's success or failure would rest entirely on her shoulders. But Major Sarah Phoenix Rodriguez had built her career on accepting difficult challenges and finding ways to succeed. She had earned her nickname by rising from situations that seemed impossible. Today would test whether that reputation was truly deserved. The clock was ticking, and the storm clouds were gathering. Soon, she would have to make the most important decision of her military career. 2 hours after the briefing, Sarah sat in the pilot's lounge reviewing the mission one final time. The intelligence packet contained every piece of information available about the Kunar Valley operation. Satellite photos, drone reconnaissance video, intercepted radio transmissions, and terrain analysis filled dozens of pages. She memorized every detail, knowing that once she was in the cockpit, there would be no time to reference written materials. Colonel Marcus Thompson, the squadron commander, approached her table. His face showed the concern of a leader who cared deeply about his pilots. Thompson had flown over 200 combat missions himself and understood the weight of what Sarah was contemplating. Major Rodriguez, I've been reviewing this mission request from the SEALs. I have to tell you, I'm having serious doubts about approving this operation. Sarah looked up from her charts. Colonel Thompson was a fair commander who balanced mission requirements with pilot safety. His concerns weren't bureaucratic, but genuine worry about losing one of his best pilots. Sir, what specific aspects concern you most? She asked. Thompson sat down across from her. Sarah, you know I have complete confidence in your flying ability. You're one of the finest A-10 pilots I've ever worked with. But this mission pushes every safety margin we have. The canyon is barely wider than your aircraft. There's no room for error, no escape route if things go wrong. Colonel, 8 American soldiers are trapped down there. Every hour we delay increases their danger. I understand that, Thompson replied. But sending you into a situation where success is nearly impossible doesn't help those soldiers. If we lose you and the aircraft, they're still trapped, and we've made the situation worse. Sarah appreciated his logic. Military commanders had to balance competing priorities: mission success, troop safety, and resource conservation. Risking valuable assets on low-probability missions wasn't good strategy, but sometimes circumstances demanded extraordinary measures. Sir, I've been studying the tactical situation. I believe there's a way to make this work. It requires precise flying and perfect timing, but it's not impossible. Colonel Thompson leaned forward. Walk me through your plan. Sarah spread the canyon map on the table between them. The key is understanding the geography. The canyon runs east to west for about 2 miles. The enemy positions are concentrated along both walls, but they're not evenly distributed. She pointed to marked positions on the map. Intelligence shows the heaviest concentration of enemy fighters here, about halfway through the canyon. That's where our soldiers are taking the most fire. If I can neutralize those positions, it creates a gap in their defensive line. What about the approach? Thompson asked. I come in from the east at 500 feet, following this ridge line. About here, she indicated a point on the map. I drop down and enter the canyon. The walls will hide me from most of the enemy positions until I'm almost on top of them. Thompson studied the route carefully. Sarah, that gives you maybe 3 seconds of target engagement time before you're past them. Can you deliver effective fire in that short window? The GAU-8 cannon fires 3,900 rounds per minute. 3 seconds gives me almost 200 rounds on target. That's enough to suppress or eliminate the positions threatening our soldiers. The plan was aggressive but theoretically sound. The A-10's cannon was devastatingly effective against infantry positions, and the element of surprise would work in her favor. The enemy wouldn't expect an aircraft to appear suddenly in their narrow valley. "What about egress?" Thompson continued. "I continue through the canyon and climb out on the western side. The terrain opens up there, giving me more maneuvering room. And if you take damage during the attack run?" Sarah had considered that possibility extensively. The A-10 can absorb significant battle damage and continue flying. Even if I lose one engine or take hits to non-critical systems, I should be able to clear the canyon. Thompson was quiet for several minutes, weighing the proposal. Sarah could see him mentally running through contingencies and risk assessments. Finally, he spoke. "Major Rodriguez, I'm going to approve this mission, but with conditions. You make one pass only. No matter what happens on the first run, you don't go back for seconds. If the first attack doesn't achieve the mission objectives, we'll find another way to help those soldiers." "Understood, sir. And if you encounter any problems during the approach, equipment malfunctions, unexpected weather, anything at all, you abort immediately. Those soldiers need help, but they don't need a dead pilot." Sarah nodded her agreement. Military aviation required accepting calculated risks, but it also demanded knowing when to walk away from a bad situation. Thompson's conditions were reasonable and professional. "One more thing," the colonel added. "I'm assigning Captain Maria Santos as your wingman. She'll orbit outside the canyon and provide communication relay with ground forces." Captain Santos was an experienced pilot with over 50 combat missions. Having a wingman would provide tactical support and serve as a witness if something went wrong. It also gave Sarah a measure of comfort to know that another pilot would be nearby. "Thank you, sir. When do we launch?" Thompson checked his watch. "Weather window closes in 3 hours. You'll launch in 90 minutes. Sarah spent the next hour in final mission preparation. She reviewed emergency procedures, studied the terrain one more time, and mentally rehearsed every aspect of the flight. Visualization was a critical tool for complex missions. By the time she strapped into the cockpit, every movement would be automatic. The armament crew was loading her aircraft as she walked out to the flight line. Technical Sergeant Walsh, supervised as technicians, installed a full load of 30 ammunition for the GAU-8 cannon. Each round was designed to penetrate armor and destroy hard targets. Against infantry positions, they would be devastatingly effective. 1,500 rounds of mixed ammunition, Walsh reported. High explosive and armor-piercing should be more than enough for the mission profile. Sarah inspected the ammunition loading personally. In combat, there was no substitute for personal verification of critical systems. Her life and the lives of the trapped soldiers depended on that cannon functioning perfectly. Captain Santos arrived as Sarah was completing her pre-flight inspection. Maria Santos was a skilled pilot with a reputation for steady nerves and excellent tactical awareness. She would be flying the newer A-10C model with advanced targeting systems. "Major Rodriguez, I understand I'm providing top cover for your canyon run today." "That's right, Captain. I'll need you to maintain position outside the canyon and relay communications with the trapped ground forces." Santos nodded. "I've been studying the mission profile. That's some serious low-level flying you're planning. Are you sure about this approach?" It was an honest question from one professional pilot to another. Sarah appreciated Santos' directness. "I'm sure it's dangerous," Sarah replied, "but I'm also sure it's the only way to get those soldiers out of there alive." "Fair enough. What do you need from me during the mission?" "Stay at 5,000 feet above the canyon entrance. You'll have radio contact with both me and the ground team. If something goes wrong during my attack run, you coordinate the rescue effort." Santos understood the implications. If Sarah's aircraft went down in the canyon, Santos would become the primary link between the crash site and rescue forces. It was a sobering responsibility. "Major, I know we haven't flown together before, but I want you to know I'll be listening to every radio call. If you need anything at all, I'll be there." Sarah shook Santos' hand. Military aviation was built on that kind of mutual support. Pilots looked out for each other because they understood the risks everyone faced. The final briefing was held on the flight line with both pilots present. Commander Mitchell brought the latest intelligence updates from the trapped soldiers. The situation on the ground was deteriorating rapidly. "Alpha Team reports enemy reinforcements arriving," Mitchell said grimly. They count at least 40 fighters now, maybe more. Our boys are down to minimal ammunition. They've got 2 wounded who need medical attention. The tactical situation was getting worse by the hour. More enemy fighters meant more guns aimed at Sarah's aircraft during the attack run. But it also meant the mission was becoming more critical for the survival of the trapped soldiers. "What's the communication plan?" Sarah asked. "Call sign Phoenix for your aircraft," Mitchell replied. "Ground team is Broken Arrow. I'll be Viking Control monitoring from here. Captain Santos is Guardian Angel providing overwatch." Military radio procedures were standardized for a reason. Clear communications could mean the difference between success and failure in complex operations. Everyone needed to know exactly who was talking and what information was being passed. "Phoenix, this is Viking Control," came the radio check. "How do you copy?" "Viking Control, this is Phoenix. I copy you 5 by 5, Sarah responded. "Guardian Angel, Viking Control." "Guardian Angel copies 5 by 5, Santos confirmed. "Broken Arrow, Viking Control, radio check." Static filled the radio for several seconds before a strained voice responded. "Viking Control, Broken Arrow, we copy weak but readable. Situation is getting pretty hot down here." The soldier's voice carried the stress of men under fire. Sarah could hear automatic weapons fire in the background of his transmission. Time was running out for the trapped team. Weather conditions were holding steady, but wouldn't last much longer. Meteorology reported wind speeds increasing and visibility decreasing as the storm front approached. The mission window was closing rapidly. "Phoenix, you are cleared for takeoff," came the tower transmission. Sarah climbed into her A-10 cockpit with a sense of focused determination. The familiar surroundings of switches, displays, and controls felt reassuring after the uncertainty of the mission planning process. This was her element, flying combat missions in challenging conditions. Technical Sergeant Walsh gave her a thumbs up as she started the engines. The twin turbofan power plants spooled up with their characteristic whine, building to the steady rumble that meant everything was functioning normally. All engine parameters showed green on her displays. "Phoenix, pre-flight complete. All systems nominal," she reported. "Roger, Phoenix. Guardian Angel is ready for takeoff." Sarah taxied her heavily loaded A-10 toward the runway. The aircraft felt solid and responsive under her control. 1,500 rounds of 30 ammunition plus full fuel load gave the aircraft substantial weight, but well within normal operating limits. The runway stretched ahead, shimmering in the afternoon heat. Beyond the airfield, the mountains of Afghanistan rose into a sky that was beginning to show signs of the approaching weather system. Somewhere in those mountains, 8 American soldiers were fighting for their lives. "Phoenix, you are cleared for takeoff. Wind is light and variable, good hunting." Sarah advanced the throttles and felt the familiar acceleration as 30,000 pounds of aircraft and weapons began rolling down the concrete. The A-10 was not a graceful aircraft, but it was powerful and reliable. As her airspeed increased, she could feel the wings beginning to generate lift. At 120 knots, she pulled back gently on the stick and felt the aircraft leave the ground. The sensation of flight was as thrilling as the first time she had experienced it years ago. Below her, the airfield fell away as she climbed into the Afghan sky. "Phoenix airborne, climbing to 5,000 feet. Guardian Angel is airborne and joining formation." Captain Santos A-10 appeared off Sarah's right wing as both aircraft climbed toward their initial altitude. The 2 warthogs flew in loose formation, their gray camouflage paint schemes blending with the mountainous terrain below. "Phoenix, Viking Control, latest intelligence update. Broken Arrow reports enemy activity increasing. Estimate 45 hostile fighters now in position." The enemy was reinforcing faster than expected. What had started as a platoon-sized ambush was becoming a company-sized engagement. The Taliban understood the value of the tactical situation and were committing additional resources to maintain their advantage. "Guardian Angel, Phoenix, are you ready to proceed to target area?" "Guardian Angel is ready. Phoenix, be advised that radio communications with Broken Arrow are becoming intermittent. The enemy may be jamming their frequencies." Communication problems added another layer of complexity to an already difficult mission. Sarah needed to coordinate her attack with the trapped soldiers to avoid hitting friendly forces. If radio contact was lost, the margin for error became even smaller. The flight to the target area took 20 minutes. Sarah used the time to review her attack profile one final time and mentally prepare for the most challenging flying of her career. Below them, the Afghan landscape rolled past, an endless succession of mountains, valleys, and rocky terrain that had challenged invaders for centuries. Phoenix target area in sight. Guardian Angel assume overwatch position. Captain Santos banked away to take up her assigned position 5,000 feet above the canyon entrance. From there, she would coordinate communications and provide tactical updates during Sarah's attack run. Guardian Angel in position. Phoenix, I have visual contact with the canyon entrance. Broken Arrow, Guardian Angel, do you copy? Static filled the radio before a weak reply came through. Guardian Angel, Broken Arrow, we copy. Situation is desperate. Request immediate air support. Broken Arrow, Phoenix, I am inbound for attack run. Mark your position with infrared strobes if possible. Phoenix, unable to mark position without exposing location to enemy. We are approximately center of canyon, south wall, behind large boulder formation. Sarah was now committed to the most dangerous part of the mission. She would have to identify friendly forces by their location description alone, while flying at high speed through a narrow canyon filled with enemy fighters. The possibility of mistakenly engaging friendly forces added enormous pressure to an already stressful situation. Phoenix beginning attack approach. Guardian Angel maintain communication with Broken Arrow. Roger Phoenix. Broken Arrow, Guardian Angel will coordinate your fire support. Keep your heads down. Sarah banked her A-10 toward the canyon entrance and began her descent toward the ridge line that would mask her approach. The moment of truth was rapidly approaching. Everything she had trained for, everything she had learned about flying and fighting, would be tested in the next few minutes. Below her, the Kunar Valley stretched out like a wound in the earth, narrow and forbidding. Somewhere in that canyon, 8 American soldiers were counting on her to save their lives. The enemy positions were waiting, hidden among the rocks and shadows. Success would require perfect flying, perfect timing, and perfect courage. The storm clouds were building on the horizon, but for now the sky remained clear. Weather was holding just long enough to give her one chance at this impossible mission. It would have to be enough. Sarah's A-10 dropped below the ridgeline at 300 miles per hour, following the terrain contours with precision that came from years of low-level training. The ground rushed past her cockpit windows in a blur of brown rock and sparse vegetation. Every muscle in her body was tense with concentration as she prepared for the most dangerous few minutes of her flying career. Phoenix, 2 miles from canyon entrance, she radioed. Guardian Angel, any updates from Broken Arrow? Captain Santos' voice crackled through the radio. Phoenix, Broken Arrow reports heavy automatic weapons fire from multiple positions. They're taking hits and running low on ammunition. Enemy appears concentrated on both canyon walls about halfway through the passage. The intelligence matched what Sarah had studied during mission planning, but hearing it confirmed while approaching the target added urgency to an already critical situation. Those soldiers had been under fire for nearly 8 hours. Their position was becoming untenable with each passing minute. Broken Arrow, Phoenix, Sarah transmitted. I am 1 minute out from attack run. When you hear my engines, get as low as possible and stay there until I give you the all clear. Phoenix, Broken Arrow copies. We'll be ready, give them hell. The soldier's voice carried determination despite obvious exhaustion. Sarah knew that Alpha Team consisted of elite warriors who wouldn't give up easily, but everyone had limits. Physical fatigue, ammunition shortages, and mounting casualties were taking their toll. Sarah's aircraft approached the canyon entrance at 250 feet above ground level. The opening appeared suddenly between 2 massive rock formations, like a crack in the Earth's surface. She had studied this approach dozens of times on maps and aerial photos, but seeing it in person was startling. The canyon looked impossibly narrow for an aircraft the size of the A-10. Phoenix entering the canyon, she announced, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The world changed instantly as her aircraft dropped into the narrow passage. Rock walls rose vertically on both sides, creating a corridor barely wider than her wingspan. The sensation was like flying inside a tunnel, with shadows and reflected light creating an alien environment unlike anything in normal flight training. Wind patterns in the confined space immediately grabbed her aircraft, causing unexpected turbulence that required constant stick adjustments. The canyon walls created their own weather system, channeling air currents in unpredictable directions. Sarah's hands moved smoothly on the controls, making continuous small corrections to keep the aircraft centered in the narrow passage. Guardian Angel Phoenixes in the canyon, maintaining 50 feet above deck. Flying 50 feet above the rocky canyon floor at 200 miles per hour required absolute concentration. There was no time to look at instruments or check systems. Everything had to be done by feel and instinct developed through thousands of hours of flying experience. The canyon floor rushed past below her aircraft in a blur of rocks, scattered boulders, and occasional patches of scrub brush. Her altitude was so low that she could see individual stones and debris clearly. Any loss of concentration, any momentary lapse in control, would send her aircraft crashing into the unforgiving terrain. Enemy muzzle flashes began appearing along the canyon walls as Taliban fighters opened fire on her aircraft. The distinctive crackling sound of AK-47 automatic rifles echoed off the rock walls, creating a continuous noise that penetrated even her enclosed cockpit. Tracer rounds streaked past her cockpit windows like deadly fireworks. "Taking fire from both sides," Sarah reported, her voice calm despite the deadly light show surrounding her aircraft. The A-10's armored cockpit was designed to protect pilots from ground fire, but the volume of incoming rounds was impressive. Sarah could hear the distinctive ping of bullets striking her aircraft's titanium armor. Most of the enemy fire was ineffective due to the difficult shooting angle and her high speed, but it only took one lucky hit in the wrong place to bring down an aircraft. "Phoenix, Guardian Angel, I can see muzzle flashes from multiple positions. Estimate 20 fighters engaging you." 20 enemy fighters firing automatic weapons created a storm of lead that filled the narrow canyon. Sarah's aircraft was flying through a tunnel of bullets, but the A-10's reputation for surviving battle damage was well earned. The aircraft was specifically designed to operate in high-threat environments and continue flying despite significant combat damage. Sarah spotted the concentration of American soldiers halfway through the canyon. A cluster of large boulders on the south wall provided the only significant cover in that section. She could see muzzle flashes from their defensive position as Alpha Team returned fire against the surrounding enemy positions. "Broken arrow in sight," she announced, beginning attack run. The moment of truth had arrived. Sarah lined up her aircraft's nose with the heaviest concentration of enemy positions along the North Canyon wall. The GAU-8 cannon's targeting system showed green, indicating optimal firing parameters. She had perhaps 3 seconds to deliver devastating firepower against targets that were barely visible among the rock formations. Sarah's finger found the trigger, and she opened fire with the most powerful aircraft cannon ever built. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon thundered to life, firing 30 rounds at a rate of 3,900 per minute. The distinctive deep buzzing sound of the weapon filled the canyon as high-explosive rounds impacted the rock walls with tremendous force. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Explosions erupted along the enemy positions as 30 rounds struck rock and human targets with devastating results. Chunks of stone flew through the air as the powerful ammunition blasted fighting positions apart. Several Taliban fighters were caught in the open and disappeared in clouds of debris and smoke. On target," came the excited voice from Broken Arrow. "Phoenix, that was beautiful. Enemy fire from the north wall has stopped." Sarah's attack run had successfully neutralized the most dangerous enemy positions, but she was far from finished. Her aircraft was still flying through the canyon at high speed, and more enemy fighters remained active along the south wall. She needed to continue her attack while navigating the narrow passage. Banking slightly to the right, Sarah brought her cannon to bear on enemy positions along the South Canyon wall. The targeting was more difficult because of the proximity to friendly forces, but the threat had to be eliminated. She triggered another burst from the GAU-8, walking the explosive rounds along known enemy positions. "Ceasefire south wall, ceasefire south wall," came an urgent transmission from Broken Arrow. "You're danger close to our position." Sarah immediately lifted her finger from the trigger. In the heat of combat, the margin between friendly and enemy forces could be measured in meters. One misplaced burst could cause catastrophic friendly fire casualties. The discipline to stop shooting when ordered was as important as the courage to begin the attack. Phoenix, Roger, cease fire. How's your situation down there? Much improved. You eliminated at least 15 enemy fighters. We can move now. Sarah's attack run had broken the back of the Taliban ambush. By eliminating the enemy's advantageous positions along the canyon walls, she had given the trapped soldiers the opportunity they needed to fight their way out. But the mission wasn't over yet. Enemy fighters at the far end of the canyon were still active and dangerous. As Sarah's aircraft approached the western exit, muzzle flashes appeared among the rocks. The Taliban forces were trying to re-establish their blocking position to prevent the American soldiers from escaping. Guardian Angel Phoenix, I'm taking fire from enemy positions at the canyon exit. Request permission for second attack run. Phoenix, negative on second attack run, came Captain Santos' immediate reply. Colonel Thompson's orders were explicit. One pass only. You need to egress immediately. Sarah understood the tactical logic behind the restriction. Each pass through the canyon increased her risk exponentially. The enemy now knew her attack pattern and would be prepared for a second run. But she could see that enemy fighters were repositioning to block the soldiers' escape route. Guardian Angel, Broken Arrow is going to need help getting out of that canyon. There are still enemy positions at the western exit. Phoenix, I'll coordinate artillery support for Broken Arrow's movement. You need to get clear of the target area now. Military operations required discipline as much as courage. Sarah had accomplished her primary mission of breaking the ambush. Additional risks might not be justified, especially when other assets could provide the needed support. She pulled back on the stick and began climbing out of the canyon. The sensation of leaving the confined space was tremendous relief. After flying for nearly 2 minutes in a corridor barely wider than her aircraft, the open sky felt infinite. Sarah's hands were steady on the controls, but she could feel the adrenaline beginning to fade as the immediate danger passed. Phoenix, clear of target area. Guardian Angel, any battle damage assessment needed. Captain Santos maneuvered her aircraft to inspect Sarah's A-10 for combat damage. Flying low and slow through intense ground fire often resulted in hits that pilots couldn't detect from inside the cockpit. Phoenix, I can see multiple bullet holes in your wings and fuselage. Nothing that appears critical. Your engines look good and flight controls seem normal. The A-10's legendary durability had once again proven itself. Sarah's aircraft had absorbed dozens of hits from small arms fire without losing any critical systems. The titanium armor around her cockpit had stopped bullets that could have ended the mission catastrophically. Guardian Angel Phoenix, what's the status on Broken Arrow? Artillery support is inbound. Broken Arrow is preparing to move under cover of the bombardment. Extraction helicopter is standing by once they clear the canyon. The rescue operation was proceeding according to plan. Sarah's attack run had broken the ambush and given the trapped soldiers a fighting chance. Artillery would suppress any remaining enemy resistance while Alpha Team moved to the extraction point. Phoenix, Guardian Angel were being directed to return to base. Mission complete. Sarah banked her battle-damaged A-10 toward Bagram Airfield, following Captain Santos in loose formation. The return flight gave her time to process what had just happened. She had successfully flown an A-10 through a canyon passage that military experts had considered impossible. More importantly, 8 American soldiers would live to fight another day because of her courage. Guardian Angel Phoenix, that was some serious flying you did back there. I've never seen anything like it. Thanks, Captain. It was a team effort. Everyone did their job perfectly. The radio crackled with updates from the extraction operation. Viking Control, Broken Arrow, we are clear of the canyon and moving to extraction point. Thanks to Phoenix for saving our bacon back there. Hearing the soldier's voice confirm their escape was the best possible reward for the risks Sarah had taken. Military aviation existed to support ground forces in situations exactly like this. When conventional tactics failed, aviators found ways to accomplish the impossible. Broken Arrow Phoenix, glad we could help get home safe. The mountains of Afghanistan passed below as both aircraft flew toward base. Storm clouds were building on the horizon, but the weather was holding long enough for everyone to reach safety. The mission window had been narrow, but it had been sufficient. Phoenix, Guardian Angel, I have to ask, how did you know that canyon run would work? The margins were incredibly tight. It was a fair question from one professional pilot to another. Sarah had to think for a moment before answering. Captain, I studied every piece of intelligence we had. I calculated speeds, altitudes, and weapons parameters. But honestly, there was a lot of instinct involved. Sometimes you have to trust your training and your aircraft. Well, your instincts were dead on. I was watching from above, and there were moments when I thought there was no way you'd fit through some of those narrow sections. Sarah smiled inside her helmet. The A-10 had proven once again that it was capable of missions far beyond its original design parameters. More importantly, she had proven to herself that years of training and preparation could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. Viking Control, Guardian Angel Flight requesting approach clearance. Guardian Angel Flight cleared for approach. All aircraft and personnel are accounted for. Outstanding work today. The tower controller's words carried genuine admiration. Word of the mission would spread quickly through the aviation community. Flying an A-10 through a narrow canyon at 50 feet altitude would become legendary among pilots who understood just how difficult such a feat really was. As Bagram Airfield appeared ahead, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The mission had been successful beyond all reasonable expectations. 8 soldiers were safe, enemy forces had been neutralized, and both aircraft had returned without serious damage. In military aviation, that combination of results represented the best possible outcome. Guardian Angel Flight, you are cleared to land. Welcome home. The familiar runway stretched ahead, a concrete ribbon promising safety and mission completion. Sarah's A-10 touched down smoothly despite the battle damage, rolling out normally as she applied wheel brakes and reversed thrust. The aircraft that had seemed almost too large for the canyon passage now felt perfectly at home on the wide airfield. Technical Sergeant Walsh was waiting as Sarah taxied to her parking spot. His expression showed obvious relief at seeing his pilot and aircraft return safely. The bullet holes in the A-10's skin told the story of intense combat, but the fact that all systems were still functioning demonstrated the aircraft's incredible durability. Welcome back, Major. How'd she handle? Like a champ, Danny. She took a beating but never missed a beat. Sarah shut down the engines and began her post-flight checklist. Every switch position had to be verified, every system had to be properly secured. Even after completing an historic mission, proper procedures remained essential. As she climbed down from the cockpit, Sarah could see Colonel Thompson approaching with several other officers. The debriefing would be extensive, covering every aspect of the mission for intelligence and training purposes. Future pilots would study this operation to understand how seemingly impossible missions could be accomplished through careful planning and skilled execution. Major Rodriguez, preliminary reports suggest the mission was completely successful. All 8 soldiers extracted safely, and intelligence estimates over 20 enemy casualties. The numbers told an important story. By taking extraordinary risks, Sarah had achieved results that would save many American lives. The trapped soldiers would return to their families, and the enemy ambush capability in that valley had been permanently eliminated. Sir, the aircraft performed flawlessly. Technical Sergeant Walsh's maintenance work was perfect, and the mission planning was thorough. Everyone contributed to the success. Colonel Thompson nodded approvingly. Major, I want you to know that what you accomplished today will be studied and remembered for years to come. You've proven that with skill, courage, and determination, American aviators can overcome any challenge. As the sun set over the Afghan mountains, Sarah reflected on the day's events. The mission had tested every skill she possessed and pushed both pilot and aircraft to their absolute limits. But when American soldiers needed help, the United States Air Force had found a way to deliver it. The SEALs had insisted it was impossible to fly that low through such a narrow canyon. But Major Sarah Phoenix Rodriguez had proven them wrong in the most convincing way possible, by doing exactly what they said couldn't be done. Her aircraft bore the scars of intense combat, but she had emerged victorious from an impossible situation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new missions. But tonight, 8 American soldiers would sleep safely because one pilot had refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. The debriefing room was packed with personnel who rarely gathered in one place. Intelligence officers, Operations planners, maintenance specialists, and senior commanders all wanted to understand how Sarah had accomplished what everyone considered impossible. The mission would be studied for years as an example of innovative tactics and exceptional airmanship. Colonel Thompson sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by representatives from various military specialties. Sarah took her seat facing the assembled group, still wearing her flight suit with sweat stains that told the story of intense combat flying. Captain Santos sat beside her, ready to provide her perspective on the mission. Major Rodriguez, Colonel Thompson began, before we start the formal debriefing, I want to read you a message that just arrived from General Morrison, the theater commander. The room fell silent as Thompson opened an official communication. Messages from general officers were rare and significant, especially immediately following combat operations. Major Rodriguez, your actions today represent the finest traditions of American military aviation. By refusing to accept conventional limitations and executing a mission of extraordinary difficulty, you saved the lives of 8 American soldiers and eliminated a significant enemy threat. Your courage, skill, and determination exemplify the warrior spirit that has made our nation's military the finest in the world. Well done. General James Morrison, Commander, Coalition Forces, Afghanistan. Spontaneous applause filled the room. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and humility at the recognition. She had done her job as a military pilot, but the mission's success belonged to everyone who had contributed to the operation. Major, let's start with your approach to the mission planning, said Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Hayes, the intelligence officer. What factors convinced you that the canyon run was feasible? Sarah had been thinking about that question since landing. The decision to attempt such a dangerous mission hadn't been made lightly or based on bravado. It required careful analysis of multiple complex factors. Ma'am, the key was understanding that while the mission was extremely dangerous, it wasn't actually impossible. The A-10 specifications gave us the basic capability we needed. The canyon was 80 meters wide at its narrowest point. Our wingspan is 17.5 meters. That provided adequate clearance if flown with precision. Major Frank Wilson, the operations officer, leaned forward. But Major, those numbers don't account for wind, turbulence, or the need to maneuver while under fire. The safety margins were essentially zero. You're absolutely right, sir, Sarah acknowledged. But sometimes zero margin is enough if everything is executed perfectly. The mission required accepting that level of risk because 8 lives depended on it. The discussion revealed the complex decision-making process that preceded the mission. Military operations always involved risk assessment, but this particular mission pushed those calculations to their absolute limits. The difference between acceptable risk and reckless endangerment could be measured in inches and milliseconds. Captain Santos added her perspective. From my overwatch position, I could see the entire engagement. Major Rodriguez maintained perfect aircraft control throughout the attack run. The precision required was unlike anything I've witnessed in 12 years of flying. Technical Sergeant Walsh had been invited to discuss the aircraft's performance under extreme conditions. His expertise was crucial for understanding how the A-10 had withstood the stress of canyon flying while absorbing battle damage. The aircraft performed flawlessly, Walsh reported. We counted 47 bullet holes in the airframe, including several hits to non-critical flight control components. The engines never showed any signs of distress, and all primary systems remained functional throughout the mission. The maintenance perspective was vital for future planning. If similar missions might be required, understanding equipment limitations and capabilities would be essential. The A-10 had once again proven its reputation for durability and reliability in extreme combat conditions. Commander Mitchell, representing the SEAL team that had requested the mission, was present to provide the ground perspective. His tactical assessment would help complete the picture of what had actually been accomplished. Major Rodriguez, from our perspective, your attack run completely changed the tactical situation, Mitchell said. Our soldiers went from being pinned down and running out of ammunition to having freedom of movement and clear escape routes. The precision of your fire was remarkable. The ground commander's assessment carried special weight because he understood the life-or-death nature of the situation. Alpha Team had been facing imminent capture or death before the air support arrived. The successful extraction validated the extraordinary risks that Sarah had accepted. "Commander, what was the enemy's reaction to the attack?" asked Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. "Complete shock initially, followed by panic and confusion. They had established what they thought was an impregnable position. When an A-10 appeared suddenly in their canyon, flying at treetop level and delivering devastating firepower, it shattered their tactical plan completely. The psychological impact of the attack had been as important as the physical damage. Enemy fighters who had felt secure in their mountain positions discovered that American air power could reach them anywhere. That lesson would spread throughout the Taliban network, affecting their future tactical decisions." Colonel Thompson turned the discussion to lessons learned and future applications. "Major Rodriguez, if we faced a similar situation in the future, what modifications would you recommend to our tactics or procedures?" Sarah had been thinking about that question throughout the return flight. Every mission provided opportunities to improve future operations, even when the current mission was successful. "Sir, I think the key lesson is that our aircraft are often more capable than we realize. The A-10 was designed for close air support, but we've been conservative about interpreting what that means in practice. Today proved that with proper planning and execution, we can operate in environments that seem impossible." "What about risk management?" asked Major Wilson. "How do we balance mission requirements against pilot and aircraft safety?" "That's the most difficult question," Sarah admitted. "Each situation has to be evaluated individually. In this case, 8 American lives were at stake and no other options existed. That justified accepting extreme risk, but the same mission profile might not be justified for less critical objectives." The discussion reflected the complex ethical and tactical considerations that military leaders face daily. Protecting American lives sometimes required risking American lives. The challenge was making those decisions wisely and ensuring that risks were accepted only when absolutely necessary. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior enlisted advisor, asked about the human factors involved in extreme missions. "Major, how do you prepare mentally for a mission where the margin for error is essentially zero?" "Chief, I think it comes down to training and confidence in your equipment," Sarah replied. "I've flown thousands of hours in the A-10. I know exactly how it handles in every situation. That familiarity lets you push the aircraft to its limits when circumstances require it." The training perspective was crucial for developing future pilots who might face similar challenges. Military aviation required years of preparation to build the skills and judgment needed for extreme missions. There were no shortcuts to developing that level of expertise. "What about the physical demands?" asked Captain Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the flight surgeon. "Flying at high speed through a narrow canyon while under fire must create enormous stress on the human body." Sarah considered the medical aspects of the mission. "Doctor, the physical demands were significant but manageable. The real challenge was mental, processing multiple sources of information simultaneously while maintaining perfect aircraft control. The adrenaline actually helped maintain focus and reaction time." Understanding the physiological aspects of extreme flying was important for pilot selection and training programs. Not every pilot would be capable of handling such demanding conditions, and identifying those capabilities was essential for mission planning. The intelligence officer brought up operational security concerns. "Major, this mission will undoubtedly become known throughout the aviation community. How do we maintain operational surprise for future similar missions?" "Ma'am, I think the enemy already knows we're willing to take extraordinary risks to rescue our people. That knowledge might actually work in our favor by making them less confident in defensive positions they previously considered secure." The strategic implications of the mission extended beyond the immediate tactical success. Enemy forces throughout the region would now understand that American air power could reach them in previously safe locations. That psychological pressure could affect their future operations significantly. Colonel Thompson began wrapping up the formal debriefing. "Major Rodriguez, your mission today will be written up for several awards and decorations. The Air Force Cross has been recommended, along with inclusion in the Combat Pilot Hall of Fame." Sarah felt honored by the recognition, but knew that awards were secondary to mission accomplishment. "Sir, the real reward is knowing that 8 American soldiers went home to their families tonight." That's exactly the attitude that made this mission successful, Thompson replied. Your focus was entirely on mission accomplishment and protecting American lives. Personal recognition was never part of your calculation. As the formal debriefing concluded, smaller groups continued discussing various aspects of the mission. Engineers wanted to understand aircraft stress loads during canyon flying. Intelligence specialists were analyzing enemy reaction patterns. Maintenance personnel were documenting battle damage for future reference. Captain Santos approached Sarah as the room began to clear. Major, I want you to know that watching you fly today changed my understanding of what's possible in military aviation. You didn't just complete an impossible mission, you expanded the definition of what impossible means. Captain, every pilot in this squadron is capable of exceptional performance when the mission requires it. Today just happened to be my turn to prove that. The conversation reflected the culture of military aviation, where individual excellence served the collective mission. Pilots supported each other because they understood that everyone faced similar challenges and risks throughout their careers. Technical Sergeant Walsh had completed his detailed inspection of Sarah's aircraft and approached with his findings. Major, I've been working on A-10s for 12 years, and I've never seen one take this kind of abuse and keep flying normally. You brought her home with 47 bullet holes, but every critical system is intact. Danny, your maintenance work made the mission possible. When I needed that aircraft to respond perfectly under extreme conditions, it never let me down. The relationship between pilot and crew chief was fundamental to military aviation success. Maintenance personnel took personal pride in aircraft performance, knowing that their work directly affected pilot survival and mission accomplishment. Commander Mitchell sought Sarah out before leaving the briefing. Major Rodriguez, I want you to know that Alpha Team will never forget what you did today. Those 8 soldiers owe their lives to your courage and skill. Commander, they would have done the same for any of us. That's what makes our military special. We never leave anyone behind, no matter what it takes. The Special Operations perspective added another dimension to the mission's significance. SEAL teams operated in extremely dangerous environments, but they counted on air support when situations became desperate. Sarah's willingness to accept extraordinary risk reinforced the bonds between different military specialties. As evening approached, Sarah finally had time to process the day's events privately. She walked out to the flight line where her A-10 sat under repair lights, with maintenance crews working to patch bullet holes and inspect damaged components. The aircraft looked battered but unbroken, much like how she felt herself. The mission had pushed both pilot and aircraft beyond their normal operating limits, but it had also demonstrated that those limits were often more flexible than anyone realized. With proper preparation, skilled execution, and absolute determination, military personnel could accomplish missions that seemed impossible. Sarah thought about the 8 soldiers who were now safe at their base camp, probably telling their own stories about the day's events. They had experienced the mission from ground level, watching enemy positions explode around them as the A-10's cannon delivered devastating firepower. Their perspective would be different but equally intense. The broader implications of the mission would continue unfolding for months. Military tacticians would study the operation to understand new possibilities for air-ground cooperation. Enemy forces would adjust their defensive thinking to account for American willingness to accept extreme risks. Most importantly, American soldiers worldwide would know that their air support would go to any length necessary to bring them home safely. Colonel Thompson found Sarah at her aircraft as the sun set over the Afghan mountains. Major, I know today was extraordinary, but I need to ask, are you prepared to attempt similar missions if circumstances require it? Sarah considered the question carefully. The mission had been successful, but it had also been incredibly dangerous. Future operations might not have such favorable outcomes. Sir, if American lives are at stake and no other options exist, then yes. But I think we should also work on developing tactics that give us more options in similar situations. Agreed. Your mission today opened new possibilities, but we need to explore those possibilities systematically rather than relying on individual heroics. The conversation reflected mature leadership thinking about incorporating lessons learned into future doctrine. Exceptional missions could inspire new tactics, but they had to be developed into repeatable procedures that didn't depend on individual skill alone. As darkness fell over Bagram Airfield, Sarah finally headed back to her quarters. The day had been unlike any other in her military career. She had flown a mission that defied conventional wisdom and succeeded beyond all reasonable expectations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new missions, but tonight she would rest with the satisfaction of knowing that when American soldiers needed help, she had found a way to deliver it. The SEALs had insisted it was impossible to fly that low through such a narrow canyon. Major Sarah Phoenix Rodriguez had proven them wrong in the most conclusive way possible. 6 months after the Kunar Valley mission, Major Sarah Rodriguez found herself standing before a packed auditorium at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. The room held over 400 cadets, instructor pilots, and senior officers who had gathered to hear her speak about the mission that had become legendary throughout the military aviation community. The formal presentation was part of the Academy's distinguished lecture series, where exceptional military personnel shared their experiences with future Air Force officers. Sarah's story had been chosen because it demonstrated the kind of innovative thinking and courage that military leaders wanted to instill in the next generation. Cadets, Sarah began, looking out at the young faces that represented America's future military leadership. 6 months ago, I was asked to attempt a mission that everyone believed was impossible. Today, I want to share with you what I learned about the difference between impossible and extremely difficult. The auditorium was completely silent. These future officers understood that they were hearing from someone who had pushed the boundaries of military aviation and succeeded. Sarah's presentation would become part of their professional education and influence their own decision-making throughout their careers. The mission began with 8 American soldiers trapped in an Afghan canyon, Sarah continued. Enemy forces had established positions along both canyon walls, creating a crossfire that made rescue impossible using conventional tactics. Every standard approach had been tried and failed. Sarah used detailed slides to show the tactical situation, including reconnaissance photos and terrain analysis. The visual presentation helped the audience understand the complexity of the challenge and why traditional solutions had proven inadequate. The Navy SEALs who briefed the mission were clear about their assessment. Flying an A-10 through that canyon at low altitude was impossible. The margins were too small, the risks too great, and the probability of success too low. A cadet in the front row raised her hand. Major Rodriguez, what convinced you to attempt the mission despite those assessments? It was the question Sarah had been asked dozens of times since the mission. Her answer had evolved as she reflected on the decision-making process and its broader implications. Cadet, I think the key insight was distinguishing between theoretical impossibility and practical impossibility. Theoretically, the mission was extremely dangerous but not actually impossible. The A-10's wingspan was smaller than the canyon width. The aircraft's performance capabilities were adequate for the required flight profile. The weapons systems could deliver the necessary firepower. Sarah clicked to the next slide, showing detailed calculations of aircraft clearances and performance parameters. The numbers told a story of narrow margins but feasible operation. The difference between theory and practice was execution. Successfully completing the mission required perfect flying, perfect timing, and perfect coordination. There was no margin for error, but zero margin can be enough when everything goes exactly right. Major General Patricia Williams, the Academy Commandant, was present for the presentation. Her questions focused on the leadership and decision-making aspects of the mission rather than the technical flying details. Major Rodriguez, how did you balance your responsibility to complete the mission against your responsibility to preserve valuable aircraft and train personnel? The question addressed one of the fundamental dilemmas of military leadership. Commanders had to weigh mission requirements against force protection, often making decisions that involved accepting significant risks to save lives. General Williams, I think the key was understanding that 8 American soldiers would die if the mission failed. That reality put everything else in perspective. The aircraft and my own safety were important, but they were secondary to bringing those soldiers home alive. The answer reflected the warrior ethos that placed mission accomplishment and care for fellow service members above personal safety. It was a principle that every military officer needed to understand and internalize. Colonel James Mitchell, the Air Force Academy's Dean of Faculty, posed the next question. Major, how has this mission influenced your approach to seemingly impossible challenges in subsequent operations? Sarah had been thinking about that question for months. The Kunar Valley mission had changed her understanding of what was possible in military aviation, but it had also taught her important lessons about risk management and decision-making. Sir, I think the mission taught me that our limitations are often more flexible than we realize. Aircraft, weapons, and human capabilities can be pushed beyond their normal operating parameters when circumstances require it. But that knowledge also comes with responsibility to use those capabilities wisely. The lesson was important for future military leaders who would face their own impossible situations. Understanding expanded capabilities was valuable, but knowing when to employ them was equally crucial. A senior instructor pilot asked about the technical aspects of canyon flying. Major Rodriguez, what specific flying techniques did you use to maintain aircraft control in such confined space? Sarah had discussed this topic extensively with other pilots who were studying the mission for tactical applications. The flying techniques were complex but teachable to properly trained aviators. Sir, the key was maintaining constant awareness of aircraft position relative to the canyon walls. I used a combination of visual references and instrument indications to stay centered in the passage. The flight controls had to be moved smoothly and precisely. Any jerky movements could have caused loss of control. The technical discussion continued for several minutes as instructor pilots explored the details of extreme low-level flying. Many of these officers would be responsible for training future A-10 pilots, and they needed to understand the capabilities and limitations involved. Chief Master Sergeant Thompson, the Academy's senior enlisted advisor, asked about the maintenance and support aspects of the mission. Major, how important was the relationship between you and your crew chief in making this mission successful? The question highlighted an often overlooked aspect of military aviation. Pilots received most of the attention, but successful missions depended on extensive support from maintenance personnel, intelligence specialists, and other team members. Chief Technical Sergeant Walsh's work was absolutely critical. The aircraft had to perform flawlessly under extreme conditions, and his maintenance expertise made that possible. Military aviation is always a team effort, even when only one pilot is in the cockpit. Sarah's answer emphasized the collaborative nature of military operations. Individual heroics captured public attention, but sustained success required effective teamwork across multiple specialties and ranks. The presentation continued with detailed analysis of the mission's broader implications. Military tacticians had studied the operation extensively, developing new procedures for extreme close air support missions. The lessons learned were being incorporated into pilot training programs and operational planning processes. The mission demonstrated that American air power can reach enemy forces anywhere they choose to hide, Sarah explained. That psychological impact extends far beyond the immediate tactical success. Enemy commanders now understand that no position is truly safe from American military capabilities. A cadet asked about the personal impact of completing such a dangerous mission. Major Rodriguez, how did the experience change your perspective on military service and your role as a pilot? The question was more personal than most, but Sarah felt it deserved an honest answer. The mission had indeed affected her understanding of duty, courage, and the responsibilities that came with military leadership. Cadet, I think the mission reinforced my understanding that military service is about serving something larger than yourself. Those 8 soldiers trusted that their fellow service members would do everything possible to bring them home safely. Living up to that trust is what military service means. The answer reflected the core values that sustained military personnel through dangerous and difficult situations. When personal safety conflicted with duty to fellow service members, duty had to take precedence. General Williams concluded the formal presentation with observations about leadership and innovation in military operations. Major Rodriguez, your mission represents the kind of adaptive thinking that our military needs in an era of evolving threats and changing operational environments. Thank you, General. I hope the message cadets take away is that impossible missions are often just missions that require exceptional preparation, execution, and determination. After the formal presentation, Sarah participated in smaller discussion groups with cadets who had specific questions about military aviation careers. These informal sessions often provided more valuable learning opportunities than the formal lectures. Major Rodriguez asked Cadet First Class Jennifer Park, "What advice would you give to someone who wants to fly combat missions but is concerned about their ability to handle extreme situations?" Sarah appreciated the cadet's honest question. Military aviation attracted people who wanted to serve their country, but not everyone was suited for the most demanding missions. Cadet Park, I think the key is understanding that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's performing your duty despite being afraid. Everyone feels fear in dangerous situations. The difference is whether you let that fear control your actions or whether you control the fear. The conversation continued with questions about training, career development, and the realities of military aviation life. Sarah tried to provide honest assessments that would help these future officers make informed decisions about their service. Captain Martinez, one of the instructor pilots, asked about changes in A-10 tactics following the Kunar Valley mission. "Major, has the Air Force modified its approach to close air support based on lessons learned from your operation?" "Captain, we're definitely exploring new possibilities for A-10 employment in complex terrain. The mission proved that our aircraft are more capable than we previously realized, but we're being careful to develop safe procedures for pushing those capabilities." The tactical evolution was proceeding gradually and systematically. Military organizations learned from exceptional missions, but they also had to ensure that new procedures could be executed safely by typical pilots under normal circumstances. As the day concluded, Sarah reflected on the broader impact of sharing her story with future military officers. These cadets would graduate to become pilots, navigators, intelligence officers, and commanders throughout the Air Force. The lessons they learned today would influence military operations for decades to come. The Kunar Valley mission had accomplished its immediate objective of rescuing 8 trapped soldiers, but its long-term impact was proving to be much broader. The operation had expanded understanding of what was possible in military aviation and demonstrated the importance of innovative thinking when conventional approaches failed. 6 months earlier, Sarah had been just another A-10 pilot flying routine missions in Afghanistan. The Canyon Run had changed that, making her a symbol of American military aviation's willingness to take extraordinary risks when lives were at stake. But she understood that the real heroes were the 8 soldiers who had volunteered for dangerous duty behind enemy lines. Her mission had simply given them the chance to complete their service and return home to their families. That evening, Sarah received a phone call from Sergeant First Class Mike Thompson, one of the soldiers from Alpha Team who had been rescued from the canyon. He was calling from his home in Texas, where he was spending time with his family before deploying again. "Major Rodriguez, I wanted you to know that my daughter just started kindergarten. She asked me to tell the pilot lady thank you for bringing Daddy home." The simple message from a 5-year-old girl carried more meaning than all the official recognition and awards Sarah had received. Military service was ultimately about protecting the American way of life, including the right of children to grow up with their fathers. "Sergeant Thompson, please tell your daughter that helping bring you home was the greatest honor of my career." As Sarah ended the phone call, she thought about the continuing ripple effects of that one mission. 8 soldiers had returned to their families. Enemy forces had lost confidence in previously secure positions. Military aviation had gained new understanding of aircraft capabilities, and future officers had learned about the importance of innovative thinking and absolute determination. The SEALs had insisted it was impossible to fly that low through such a narrow canyon. Major Sarah Phoenix Rodriguez had proven them wrong, but more importantly, she had demonstrated that American military personnel would go to any length necessary to protect their fellow service members. The mission was over, but its legacy would continue influencing military operations and inspiring future generations of warriors who understood that impossible was just another word for extremely difficult. And when American lives were at stake, extremely difficult was always worth attempting. Years later, the Canyon Run would still be taught at military academies and flight schools around the world. But Sarah would always remember it simply as the day she helped 8 American soldiers come home to their families. Everything else was just details.